Hey, it's me, the Soy Pill. Sorry for everyone that wanted the Donald Trump is racist video. Instead, I threw a dart at the Santa list of racist things he's done, and we're doing that one. 8 years after Charlottesville, and I still hear this line being used. The fine people hoax, referring to the media lie that Trump called neo-Nazis fine people. Newly approved White House press member Tim Pool included it in his embarrassing sycophantic question, "Wow, the media sure is mean to Donald Trump, isn't it, Mrs. Press Secretary?"
Many of the news organizations that are represented in this room have marched in lockstep on false narratives, such as the Very Fine People hoax, the Covington smear, and now what's being called the Maryland Man hoax. I'm wondering if you could comment on that unprofessional behavior, as well as elaborate if there's any plans to expand access to new companies.
How embarrassing.
You would think that we could stop talking about Charlottesville, but it will probably be a pivotal moment in the history books, as it's allegedly the impetus for Joe Biden to run in 2020.
He said there were, quote, some very fine people on both sides. That's why today I'm announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
And it's the time that white nationalism reared its ugly fangs in public, before becoming the stupidest version of itself. But the fine people quote is not a hoax. In fact, the fine people hoax is a hoax. And I'll show you why. I shouldn't have to make this video. YouTuber Shaun has 2 very good videos on Charlottesville, but for some reason, they didn't take for a portion of the beanie population. Is it because he's British? Because the only people who watched it already agreed with him? Do some of you need a non-British, slightly bridge-building approach? Actually, that's a good idea. First, I want to make an appeal to you Trump supporters who think the media unfairly reports on Trump. That's right, I'm going to plug my nose and defend Trump for 60 seconds. Liberals, close your ears. You know how everyone says that he mocked this disabled reporter?
You got to see this guy. I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
This looks really bad. He's flailing his hands around in a way that suggests imitation of Sergei Kovaleski and his congenital joint condition. But I actually don't think he was calling that guy out specifically. He's done it multiple times since.
They said, Senator Cruz, what do you think of waterboarding? I don't want to talk about it. He didn't.
Though some say that that's him trying to obfuscate the reporter example. But he also did it a month before.
When you see the president of the bank, I mentioned the word regulated.
And to someone else in the same speech before the reporter.
And I watched a general recently on television, and they said to him, what do you think about ISIS? Oh, ISIS is very tough.
It seems like this hand-shaking stim is a thing that Trump does for many people, regardless of their joint health. So he probably wasn't singling this guy out. It turns out he makes fun of all sorts of people by flailing around and pretending he's physically and or mentally disabled. It's like if he called everyone he hated retarded, and then one day called a mentally disabled reporter that he didn't like retarded, which is better? So now that I've established my charitability, before we get to Trump's comments, it's important that we talk about the background of the Charlottesville protest, because it adds vital context to his comments. The Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville was a protest against the city's removal of the statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. It was part of a movement to remove multiple Confederate statues in response to the 2015 Charleston shooting of a black church, which, despite what my racist uncle told me, was inspired by racist hatred for black people, and not this Childish Gambino music video that came out 3 years later. Some people argued that by taking down statues, they were erasing history, and it was part of the left-wing greater movement to rewrite narratives and change language to fit their worldview. But no one was asking us to forget the Confederacy existed. It was very specifically about the statues. Imagine you had a school bully, and every day he beat you up, gave you swirlies, stole your lunch money, hit on your hot mom, and then he got hit by a car or something. So his dad commissioned a statue of him in the middle of the school quad. And every day, you had to get up and see that brutal reminder of all the trauma he caused you. Now imagine, instead of bullying just you, he bullied every black person in America. And by bully, I mean enslaved and tortured and brutalized and fought to the death to keep it that way. Can you see why these statues are kind of fucked up? Why a bunch of people don't really like having them around? Now, it's important to know that these statues weren't put up right after the Civil War to commemorate these men's brave dedication to preserving slavery. Here's a timeline of when Confederate statues were built. Wow, there really is a graph for everything. You'll see 2 spikes of statues being built. One in the early 1900s during the establishment of Jim Crow laws, and the other in the 50s and 60s during the Civil Rights Movement. Many of these statues were funded by the Daughters of the Confederacy, started by actual descendants of Confederate veterans. Now, I could do a whole video on these assholes, but their greatest moments include promoting the Lost Cause movement, aka the idea that slavery was actually super cool and the Civil War was about states' rights, restricting their membership to whites only, and lionizing and honoring the KKK. I understand the people who see these as an important part of American history, but just know that most of them are there to spite black people getting rights. And we're not going to start redacting history books like the Epstein files that Trump will never release. Germans do a pretty good job of remembering the Holocaust without 10,000 Hitler statues. I think we can do it too. So other than these angels, what other groups were opposed to the statue's removal? The Unite the Right rally was incepted and organized by Jason Kessler. Kessler is a neo-Nazi who was so racist that the Proud Boys had to eject him.
The alt-right is a threat to the establishment. We're talking about the people who run the media. We know that there's disproportionate Jewish influence. We'll talk about the fact that there are biological differences in race. White people have a right to organize, and that if we don't do so, we're going to be replaced and we don't have a future for our people.
And with regards to the Confederacy, said, our entire country would be better off if the South had won the Civil War. His rally had a legal background of being a hate rally. It was initially barred by the city from being held in Lee Park due to safety concerns, but a judge ruled the day before that the city wanted to move the rally because of the white nationalist views of Kessler, and not just for safety or logistics, and that it could be held in Lee Park, a decision supported by the ACLU, which, for those of you who don't know, famously fight for even the most bigoted of views to be expressed under the First Amendment. Now, at this point, you may be thinking, okay, so a neo-Nazi organized this thing, but I, or others I know, don't like the removal of statues. And just because we align on those things doesn't mean that we're neo-Nazis. And you'd be right. Am I a Nazi because I like dogs and Hitler liked dogs? Of course not. I'm a Nazi because it was the only way to survive prison. But this is why it's important to look at the timeline of events and who was participating. I bet you're already frustrated looking at all this background information and realizing that you never had the totality of information on your side. It's so hard to choose who to trust between the mainstream media and this one guy with a beanie. What if instead you didn't trust one source, but looked at many different sources at once using ground news? Every day, ground news gathers thousands of news articles from around the world and organizes them by story in one place. And since they know you like shiny images that stimulate your brain, you'll get a visual breakdown of the story's political bias, reliability, and ownership.
Hey Jimmy, I bet you're reading about the intricacies of the ongoing geopolitical conflict between India and Pakistan. You better be using ground news to look at all the different coverage about the ceasefire. By using the bias comparison tool, you're gonna see that the right-wing sources have been highlighting Trump's involvement, while the left-wing sources have focused on the humanitarian milestone. They even have a blind spot feature so you can see what one side of the media is covering and what they're ignoring. Boy, am I glad I went to ground.news/thesoypill. I got 40% off the Vantage plan. And I feel way smarter than all the other guys who just get their news from TikTok and that little boy who shouts things on the corner. It sounds so good, I want to say it a second time. Ground.news/thesoypill. Just rolls off the tongue. Great work, Jimmy. Stay informed.
August 11th was the night before the planned protest at the statue, and the night of the infamous Tiki Torch rally. Hundreds of neo-Nazis carried flaming torches and marched through University of Virginia's campus. We know they're neo-Nazis thanks to them saying neo-Nazi things like, Jews will not replace us,
Jews will not replace us,
and blood and soil.
blood and soil, blood and soil.
Brawls ensued between these neo-Nazis and the counter-protester students, and the next morning, Trump tweeted out, "We all must be united and condemn all that hate stands for," which is a very vague platitude, and may or may not have something to do with the fact that a large portion of the white nationalist alt-right base supports him, especially considering that he appointed Steve Bannon, proponent of the alt-right, as his chief strategist. And he has a history of reluctance to denounce these groups, like when he struggled to denounce the KKK until reporters rubbed his face in it.
Will you unequivocally condemn David Duke and say that you don't want his vote or that of other white supremacists in this election?
I don't know anything about David Duke.
I guess the question from the Anti-Defamation League is, there are these groups and individuals endorsing you. Would you just say unequivocally you condemn them and you don't want their support?
Well, I have to look at the group. I mean, I don't know what group you're talking about. Certainly, I would disavow if I thought there was something wrong.
But
you may have groups in there that are totally fine.
Okay, I mean, I'm just talking about David Duke and the Ku Klux Klan here, but...
I don't know, honestly, I don't know David Duke.
One of the great memories of all time.
Now, August 12th was the day of the actual protest, and there's not exactly statistics on the views of every protester here. Really, I don't even know how you'd find this out. Just go around asking people, "Hey buddy, Heil Hitler?" No? How about you? Heil Hitler? Oh yeah, this guy knows what I'm talking about. It may in fact be true that some people just really wanted to preserve the statue of slavery defender Robert E. Lee. Perhaps the non-Nazi people didn't see these specific promotional posters that featured the names of neo-Nazis like white nationalist Richard Spencer or white nationalist Mike Enoch. Maybe they never questioned that the movement they were supporting was being promoted by David Duke of the KKK, also a scheduled speaker.
Honestly, I don't know David Duke.
Maybe they missed the headlines ahead of time from the media that said, Charlottesville prepares for a white nationalist rally on Saturday. Maybe when marching around that day, they didn't notice that they were side by side with white nationalist groups like the actual KKK, Identity Europa, the Daily Stormer, people Nazi saluting, people holding Nazi flags of various varieties, people chanting things like, gas the kikes, race war now. Now call me crazy, but if I went to a Bernie Sanders rally and saw one, if not all of these things there, I would leave and denounce Bernie Sanders as a virulent anti-Semite. Too long has the 1% owned the vast majority of slaves. I'd also like to highlight this quote from Robert Trakinski, a self-described statue defender, who said, I live in the Charlottesville area, and I know very fine people who oppose the removal of the monuments based on high-minded notions about preserving history. I'm one of them. So I know that we weren't there that night. Only the white nationalists were there. And this is where we can finally bring Trump's first vocal comments in. 2 hours after his vague tweet, he held a press conference, which he opened like this.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
Notice that everything up till many sides is what was written on his paper, and he himself added the many sides part because he personally felt the need to make that equivalence. This is before the fine people comment, and may in fact be worse, as he's drawing some false equivalence between people there to counter-protest a rally organized by neo-Nazis and neo-Nazis. Now, what bigotry existed on the counter-protester side, we aren't sure, because Trump didn't say. But if someone can provide me with footage of the BLM tiki torchers running around chanting Jews will not replace us, let me know and I'll amend the video. Trump also said,
we must love each other, respect each other, and cherish our history and our future together.
Notice he slips in that history bit, as if to chastise the counter-protesters or anyone who wanted these Confederate statues down, and give credence to the idea that wanting to keep them up is just about preserving history. Just to remind you, neo-Nazis organized this protest, and they want these statues up because they lionize the enslavement of black people. And finally, when the reporters asked him to denounce the white nationalists, he ignored them and walked away.
Mr. President, a number of the white nationalists...
Mr. President, do you want the support of these white nationalist groups who say they support you, Mr. President?
Mr. President,
have you denounced them strongly enough?
Neo-Nazi magazine The Daily Stormer was pleased with Trump's response, saying he refused to even mention anything to do with us. When reporters were screaming at him about white nationalism, he just walked out of the room. They were happy he didn't call them out and felt bolstered by it, just like the Proud Boys when he told them to stand back and stand by.
But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
Who would
white
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud
militia.
Boys. Stand back and stand by.
Now, up until this point, Trump has not called neo-Nazis fine people, but it's not a hoax that he refused to denounce white supremacists, drew an equivalence between neo-Nazis and counter-protesters, and gave legitimacy to a protest that was organized by neo-Nazis. And I think this alone is enough to disqualify him from any sort of legitimacy going forward.
But I'm not done yet.
So most people were rightfully upset, including people on the Republican side who put pressure on Trump to not make such a limp-dick statement that barely even addressed the actual problem. Republican Senator Hatch said, "We should call evil by its name. My brother didn't give his life fighting Hitler for Nazi ideas to go unchallenged here at home." Chris Christie said, "Everyone in leadership must speak out." Ted Cruz, fucking Ted Cruz, called on the Department of Justice to investigate and prosecute the car ramming, calling it a grotesque act of domestic terrorism. Do you know how weak your statement has to be for me to use Ted Cruz as a good example? Ted Cruz's family doesn't even like Ted Cruz.
Not a day goes by that my mom is not lifting me up in prayer.
That's right.
For hours at a time.
So 2 days after doing absolutely nothing to call out the neo-Nazis specifically, Trump finally caved to pressure and read this statement off of a teleprompter.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. Racism is evil. And those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups.
He repeated the violence line without the on many sides part, and overall denounced the racism and hate groups. But even after that, the question remained, why did it take him 2 days to say this?
Mr. President, do you regret not mentioning the white supremacists on Saturday? Do you regret not saying this?
His statements were also wooden and hollow, as opposed to Trump's usual rambunctious speeches that gained him the reputation of authenticity and telling it like it is.
What he and Kamala really think of our supporters, he called them garbage. No way. No way. Racism is evil. 250 million Americans are not garbage, including the KKK.
It's almost like he's being forced to say it, like a child whose mom makes him say sorry.
Go on.
Sorry.
People might point to this speech and say, see, he said the thing you wanted them to say, which in isolation is good, but knowing how long it took him to say it, how clearly forced and inauthentic it seemed compared to his other speeches, and what he said right before this left many unsatisfied, especially when he refused to address the context. Even Richard Spencer dismissed Trump's second statement as hollow and said that he believed that Trump had not denounced either the alt-right movement or white nationalism. And finally, 3 days later, we come to the Fine People speech, which was supposed to be a speech about the economy, but reporters were finally able to ask him questions. Notice that when repeating his original statement, he leaves out the many sides part again, almost like he knows how bad it looks.
As I said on, remember this, Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence.
But after fighting with the reporters for a while, he just couldn't help himself. So here's the famous clip with all of the context.
And you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay?
And this is the crux of calling it the Fine People hoax, because while most of the media accurately reported on his statements, some people referred to this moment as Trump called neo-Nazis fine people. Yeah, he did call out white supremacists directly in this speech. And yeah, he didn't verbatim say, I, Donald Trump, love Nazis and Hitler and the KKK, and think they're very cool, actually. But this is to ignore all the context I just showed you about who organized it, the speakers, the flags, who actually murdered someone, and everything else that happened in Charlottesville that made it blatantly obvious that this was a white nationalist rally populated by almost exclusively white nationalists and maybe some very blind and deaf statue lovers. None of that is in dispute. In the face of all that, Donald Trump said that there were fine people on both sides, when one side was neo-Nazis. And on top of that, he also said,
there were people in that rally, and I looked the night before, they were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee.
So even when referring to the night before, August 11th, the rally where the only people there were the neo-Nazi torch-carrying ones, he still said that there were good people on that side. And cherry on top, he knew that they had a permit.
I don't know if you know, they had a permit.
You know, the one that was held up due to Kessler being a neo-Nazi and approved after acknowledging that despite him being a neo-Nazi, he should still have the right to protest.
When I make a statement, I like to be correct.
If Trump supporters still want to cope here, I guess you can stay believing that he's genuinely so stupid that even the entire intelligence apparatus of the White House couldn't convince him of something so plainly obvious. And now that man is running the country.
There was no way of making a correct statement that early.
So notice the trap of the right calling it the Fine People hoax. The media narrative was never Trump said verbatim that neo-Nazis are fine people. But if you didn't read these articles and you just heard the Fine People comment, you may have just repeated the idea Donald Trump called neo-Nazis fine people. Like Adam Conover, who knows absolutely nothing about this, giving Tim Pool a win.
The very fine people hoax?
I mean, I remember the line, yeah.
Trump never called Nazis fine people.
He said there were very fine people on both sides.
Except the neo-Nazis and white nationalists who should be condemned totally.
He said that?
Holy shit. shit. You don't read the fucking news. This is what fucking blows my mind.
No, I just don't have
Snopes.
Even though, as per Tim's usual reading skills, he did not scroll down to read the paragraph that said this. Editor's note. Some readers have raised the objection that this fact check appears to assume that Trump was correct in stating that there were very fine people on both sides of the Charlottesville incident. That is not the case. This fact check aimed to confirm what Trump actually said, not whether what he said was true or false. For the record, virtually every source that covered the Unite the Right debacle concluded that it was conceived of, led by, and attended by white supremacists, and that therefore Trump's characterization was wrong.
You don't read the fucking news.
Obviously, it's good to give the context and to discredit people like Tim Pool as bad faith liars. Oh hey look, it's a picture of Tim Pool trying to hide his face while he sits with several neo-Nazis, some of whom were at the Charlottesville rally. But it's also important to recognize these rhetorical traps and make sure that you don't play into their narrative. The further away this event becomes, the harder it is to know the context without watching a video like this, and the easier it becomes to lie about it. And maybe you yourself don't remember exactly what happened. That means, one, when they bring this up, pay attention to the way they framed it. If they say something like, Donald Trump never banned all Muslims from coming into the country, your immediate response can't be, yes he did, because technically he didn't. He just said he wanted to, and then did a travel ban on several predominantly Muslim countries because that was as close as he could get without it immediately being struck down. You can't let them get away with that shit. The second thing you have to do is read the fucking articles. Please, for the love of God, just read the fucking articles. People keep asking me, how do you know so much? I don't. I just read the fucking articles. It's not that hard. It's all on your phone. You stare at it all the time anyway. You can even picture-in-picture Family Guy clips and Skibbity Toilet in the corner, and everyone who doesn't do it will think you're a genius. You'll be the town hero and have lots of sex and your skin will glow and people will move out of the way. Hey, move over. We got a fucking article reader over here. I'm almost at 100,000 subs, which means there's plenty of them to trickle down in my segment, Oops, All Ladders. Today's feature is Downtown Dialogue, who made a great video about voting that mixes street interviews with actionable goals. He seemed to put a lot of effort in, so no one tell him that I would have promoted him if he posted a 20-minute black screen that just said, vote. If you want to be featured on Ladders, email me at thesoypill@gmail.com with the subject line, Ladders, and your channel name. As always, thank you to my patrons. And seeing as it's Pride Month,
The following people are gay.
Ash, Anita Bonghit, Astra Cosmos, Big Mac 1906, Bo the Banana, Brat Tamer, Church, Died Famous, Engulf, Foxy Guy, G3 Broski, Just Stop, Marsh Taylor, Morton Grew, Moth, Nipple Fisting, Omega Omelet, Toby the Robot, Mr. Thoughtless, and Shri Kumar. And don't forget to type 1 to end the deep state.